Em 1947, ocorreu o caso mais famoso em toda a ufologia mundial, o Caso Roswell. Um disco voador teria caído em nosso planeta e seus destroços e também seus tripulantes foram recolhidos pelo exército norte-americano. A entrevista de hoje, inédita e exclusiva, que você só encontra aqui neste canal, é com Donald Schmitt, ou Don Schmitt. Ele é um dos maiores pesquisadores do caso, se não maior, e ainda está em atividade investigando mais testemunhos, buscando mais evidências desse caso que o governo americano teima em falar que não é verdade. Então vem comigo nessa entrevista incrível. O Donald vai contar coisas que só ele sabe para vocês aqui no canal. Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, boa madrugada, aonde você estiver. Sejam bem-vindos ao canal Desvendando Mistérios.
Thank you, Don, to be here. Thank you for accept my invitation, and I'm pretty sure that the audience in Brazil is gonna love this interview. And well, I will begin with same question that I always begin. How did you get involved with ufology?
It was mainly through the Kennedy assassination. I was a young boy in November of 1963, and I was spellbound as to that weekend with the events that transpired in Dallas, Texas at that time. And then when the official investigation transpired, the Warren Commission, and then when the report was released, and to see the use of those words, whitewash and cover up. And it stood out to me, the very thought that why would the government be withholding the truth, withholding as far as accurate information about something as monumental as the assassination of the President of the United States. Excuse me. And then I was Christmas shopping a few years later with my parents, and I was very much in the books. Most of my classmates, they had specific toys that they wanted, but I already was, writing down particular titles. I wanted books. I loved reading books. And I came across a book with those same words, whitewash and cover up. And it was the book Flying Saucers Serious Business by the late Frank Edwards. And there was one specific chapter which was entitled Who's Driving?, which were about all the occupant cases within the UFO experience. And so the next book, which I couldn't get fast enough, was Flying Saucer Occupants by the late Coral, Jim and Coral Lorenzen. And I was hooked. It was like, as it even states in the beginning of that book, you may not believe all of these cases, but just imagine if one of them is true. And to me, that was captivating. That was the very thought that if we were being visited, and it's like we're talking the biggest story of the millennium, and how do you walk away from that? And so it just, from high school, I was giving lectures on the subject already in classes at school. Through college, I was writing reports on the subject, and then I went into field investigation training with the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. And then who should happen to take note of one of my case reports but Dr. J.Allen Center, the foremost authority on the subject. Former consultant to the Air Force Project Blue Book here in the States. And he invited me to his home in Evanston, Illinois. And we hit it off immediately. And within a year, he asked me to come on as one of his special investigators. And I later would become a director of special investigations for his Center for UFO Studies in Chicago. I served on his board of directors for 10 years. And through most of it, I was a skeptic, which then led me to Roswell, where I was a total skeptic. And as they would say, the rest is history.
Well, I didn't know that you are a BFF of Heineck, best friend forever with Dr. Heineck. It's amazing.
Yes. Oh, THIAGO, there probably isn't a day that goes by that I don't think to myself, because I obviously called him Alan, and we shared so many wonderful experiences. And he so often, when we would be in the field working together, he would always make the comment, "I'm an old man in a hurry. I'm an old man in a hurry." And I kept thinking to myself, I don't want to ever reach that point in my life that I feel like I have to speed things up to finish my mission in life, so to speak. I think it's a sad commentary that when you reach, an age that we should be able to, sit back and enjoy all the fruits of our labors, so to speak, that Heineck left with his mission still very much incomplete. And so I would listen to him say that, and yet, as I was mentioning, there isn't a day that goes by, THIAGO, that I don't think to myself, now, what would Alan say? What would Alan do in this situation? So he was not only my mentor, my teacher, my scientific director, my friend, but in many respects, he was also a father figure. And so I love the fact that his late wife, Mimi, very often when we would be working in the field, such as when she accompanied us on our first archaeological dig at the Roswell debris field, and that was in September of 1989. So that was just 3 years after Dr. Heineck had passed away. And I love the fact that she kept saying, "Alan would be so proud of you boys." Meant the world to me. In other words, that she was still, conveying that impression, that attitude to us, that Alan is still watching you. Alan is still monitoring your work. And if you need help once in a while, ask him, that type of thing. And so I loved it. I love the fact that he has so influenced much of what I've done, and he will continue to be a major inspiration for what still lies ahead.
It's amazing. It's a shame that I never met Heineck. Would be a great honor to me. But my friend, the Roswell crash is for me the most famous UFO case.
Yes.
And you are the greatest investigation of the case, in my opinion. I know Kevin Handel, but you are the best one. But many people still have questions about the chronology of the Roswell crash. After all, when did the UFO crash? For July 4, 5, 6? What happened? What the date? What the chronology?
We feel that we have pinned it down to the late evening of July 2nd, based on the activities at the ranch, the J.B. Foster Ranch that the foreman, W.W. Brazo, worked at on that particular time. For example, there were other ranchers that were sinking fence posts for the livestock, and how that ran up to the weekend, which was a 4th of July weekend, that type of thing. And then the ranchers describing a severe lightning storm the evening of the event that they heard, as described, what sounded like an explosion between the thunderclaps, the roars at that time, and through the Stallion Weather Network, we recovered finally the weather records, which clearly demonstrate such conditions, severe lightning and thunder, the late evening of July 2nd, coming off of the Capitan Mountains just to the west of the ranch and coming through between 11 and 11:30 that evening. And then we finally link it with the sighting of Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Wilmot, which happened on also July 2nd, where they saw the disc-shaped craft passing to the west of the city of Roswell, moving towards the northwest, which would have taken it up into that general region. So putting that all together, we finally have become very comfortable with being able to state that the event, the crash, took place late evening of July 2nd. And then it's the next morning, July 3rd, that Brazel first discovers the wreckage. Now there has to be a window because there's another day or two before he finds a number of bodies about 2.5 miles from the debris field atop that bluff, which we determined from multiple first-hand witnesses. And that all has to transpire before a date that we know is accurate historically, and that being Sunday, July 6th, when he made the long drive down into Roswell, where he reported the incident to the sheriff, George Wilcox. And that is a matter of, recorded fact. That's Sunday, July 6th. So you see that we have to have that chronology. Late July 2nd, the crash, early July 3rd that morning, and then the discovery of the bodies a couple of days later on the 5th, and then the trek down in the Roswell on Sunday, July 6th. So you see how it now very, very nicely comes together.
Yeah, you're correct. What would have caused the UFO crash? What do you think? The lighting, the radars, the atomic bomb? What do you think?
Well, we know that based on the eyewitness testimony of Major Jesse Marcel, who was with the 509th Bomb Wing, head of their intelligence unit, that when they first arrived, he and the counterintelligence officer, Captain Sheridan Cabot, that their first impression was, my God, look at all this wreckage. Marcel would comment that they could not get over the vast amount of debris. And then, based on the pattern in which the debris was scattered, the fact that it covered an area of almost a mile long, they immediately concluded that it had to have been a mid-air explosion, that something happened at a particular altitude. It wasn't a crash per se. It wasn't where something impacted into the ground. It was where something had a malfunction, whether it was an internal explosion or something from outside, as you mentioned, a direct lightning bolt strike. One of the things that I intend to look into further, I have the good fortune of speaking with a radar technician who worked with the CIA as a CIA officer for well over 20 years. And he point blank suggested to me that because New Mexico at that time had the most sophisticated radar system in the world, and radar was still in its infancy during that time. But because you had all the testing at the White Sands Proving Grounds, about 2 hours west of Roswell, where they were testing all the captured German V-2 rockets from World War II. And just north of there, Trinity site, where they had detonated the first atomic bomb just 2 years before. So you had a radar system at White Sands that not only tracked incoming, but also tracked departing aircraft. incoming and outgoing. All other radar facilities around the world only tracked incoming. So White Sands clearly had the strongest radar signal in the world at that time. And then to the north of there, you had a radar facility just west of Socorro that we have proven. And then to the east of there, you had another radar system in Vaughan, which is about a half hour east of the Brazel Ranch, the Rayfield site. And then to the east of there, you had Cannon Army Airfield with another radar tracking system. And to the south of there, you had Roswell Army Airfield. So you had all of these radar signals that essentially were intersecting. The radar lobes were all intersecting right in Lincoln County, exactly where this mishap, where this crash or this explosion took place. So this CIA officer, this radar tech, suggested that, Don, we need to look into the frequencies of those radar facilities back in 1947. And because they were rather primitive, that they weren't as finely tuned as they would finally become, that it may have created a lot of interference, and that one system may have created a disruption with the other as they would intersect. And so he said, let's find out if it created some type of strange radio frequency which may have indeed disabled a passing craft. And in this case, this craft of unknown origin. So I'm kind of excited that it renews the hunt in that regard. And now that we have someone with that type of background, that I can provide him with the documentation, the radar information, and let's see if indeed it points more directly to a radar mishap. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, would be. Don, there are many stories about who got to the crash site first. Mm-hmm. I mean, the crash site of the ship and the bodies. Some say there was a group of archaeologists. Others say there was Mac Brazel. After all, who found the crashed UFO?
Well, the debris field, 25 miles to the west, was discovered by Mac Brazel, the foreman of the J.B. Foster Ranch. And in his company was a young boy by the name of Timothy D. Proctor. He was 7 years old at the time. He was the son of Floyd and Loretta Proctor, Brazel's nearest neighbors. As to the impact site, just 35 to 45 miles north of Roswell, were the remains of the craft, the pod, the capsule, and the bodies were discovered. From all indications, for the very fact that both the sheriff as well as the fire department received information about the crash, the impact site, before the military did, just as Brazel originally went to the sheriff first, before the sheriff would have notified the Roswell Army Airfield. So in both cases, it was a result of civilian discovery. Now, we determined that there was an archaeological project headed by Professor William Curry Holden of Western Texas Tech College, western part of Texas. We further confirmed that with archaeologist Bertram Schultz, who was working the Guadalupe Mountains range at that time, and he was to rendezvous with Holden in Roswell to attend a archaeological conference in Albuquerque that weekend. And that Holden had been detained. He and his students were being held at the base for some unknown reason throughout that afternoon. And he would not utter a word as to the reason, according to the Schwartz, as to why the military would have essentially abducted them during that time. So then when Kevin Randall and we tracked down Curry Holden, Professor Holden. He was 90 years old at the time, and he didn't deny it. He continued to say over and over again, I saw everything. We saw everything, but I can't say any more. And tying that in with the fact that he was working within that region at the time, we believe it's a solid state of evidence suggesting that just as Brazel, as a civilian, had discovered the debris field, that Holden and his students had discovered the impact site. Now, THIAGO, keeping in mind that we had tracked down other archaeologists, even geologists, including a nurse from St. Petersburg Hospital in Seminole, Florida, who acquired a deathbed statement from a geologist who allegedly was part of this team. And she described how I was not supposed to be there. And we didn't know if that meant that, well, she got in trouble with the military. She got in trouble with the authorities for being there. As it turns out, because typically when the men went into the field, just for practical reasons and hygiene and other such concerns, they didn't take female students, that they were mainly men, male students that performed these projects. And as it turned out, they snuck her along. So she was telling the truth that one of her boyfriends snuck her along as being part of the project, and she wasn't supposed to be there, as she put it. And she described before she died that they came upon the craft and the bodies and described them just as all the other witnesses. So this whole process of investigation, as you plug it all in and all the pieces of the mosaic, assemble themselves, it clearly points to the fact that the whole story of the archaeologist was indeed correct. It was true.
That nurse is Miriam Andrea Bush?
No. This you're talking about in the case of Miriam Bush. She was the secretary of the administrator at the Roswell Hospital, Roswell Army Airfield Hospital. This nurse who spoke to this geologist who wasn't supposed to be there. This was at a hospital in Florida just before she died in the around 1990.
Okay, we will back to Miriam later. Well, how was the UFO? It was crashed, destroyed, intact? How was the UFO was founded? And the bodies, some say that there was one inside, two outside, one living, one alive. How is that? How's the truth?
Okay, we have three distinct sites that we've had first-hand witnesses, both military and civilian, all attest to. You have the one that even the Air Force agrees with, because they obviously need their Project Mogul weather balloon device as well as their wooden crash dummy to be at a specific location. So we all agree about the debris field. We just disagreed about what was recovered there, what was found there. And that's the site 65 miles northwest of Roswell on the J.B. Foster Ranch. 2.5 miles southeast of there, you have what we call the Timothy D. Proctor site. And that's where Brazel, along with the young 7-year-old Proctor boy, as well as his son Vernon, as well as a hired hand son, Sidney Wright, as well as a young girl by last name of Eddington. We believe she married Leroy Lang, and they would have discovered two bodies atop that site. Whether they had been sucked out because of from the percussion of the explosion or through the decompression of the craft, who can say? But they were discovered 2.5 miles southeast of the debris field. And then along that same trajectory line, east-southeast, 35 to 40 miles north of Roswell, is the final impact site, where the remains of a pod, a craft. It was shaped by all the eyewitness accounts, more egg-shaped, more like the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. And that's where 2 additional bodies were recovered and a survivor, a lone survivor. And that's attested to not only by military, but by the sheriff, George Wilcox, to his family, and also by a firefighter by the name of Dan Dwyer, who in both cases, the sheriff and the fire department, they arrived at the impact site just before the military, and they also both attested to the survivor, the lone survivor from the crash.
Well, that's great. That's great. Well, I had the opportunity to meet Jesse Marcel Jr. in 1997 here in Brasilia at the first World UFO World Forum here in Brasilia.
So that would have been the 50th anniversary of Roswell, 1990.
Yeah. And I touched in that bar that he had, that fragment.
That replica, it's a replica, right?
Yeah, there's a replica. Yeah. And but there was more eyewitnesses of the same, or not the same thing, but the same structure that his dad found and bring home and show him.
Right. The fact that his father, on his drive back to the base after he and Cabot, the counterintelligence officer, first went out. Now, I like to emphasize the point that it's a holiday weekend. It's here in the States, our 4th of July, our Independence Day that we celebrate every July 4th since 1776. And so most of the base personnel at the Roswell Army Airfield are home on leave. They're home with their families for the holiday. And when Brazel brings 2 boxes of wreckage into town, into Roswell, and he doesn't go to the military, he goes to the sheriff, as I had mentioned, and it's then the sheriff who makes the phone call, contacts the base, and who should pick up the phone but none other than the very head of intelligence, Major Jesse Marcel. And Marcel then retrieves a box of the wreckage from the sheriff. Just like everyone before, no one's able to identify, no one recognizes this wreckage. And it's important enough, THIAGO, that Marcel alerts the very base commander, Colonel William Blanchard. I mean, he could have just taken it upon himself. Well, I'm going to just go out and check this out. I'm the head of intelligence. I'm a major. It's a holiday weekend. I'll just go check it out. Or he could have sent out a couple of enlisted men, a couple of, grunts, as they would call them here in the military. Just go humor the rancher. Let's go just check it out. So it's growing in the level of importance by the minute, because you now have the base commander who also is unable to identify very strange wreckage. And then he dispatches Marcel and Cabot to follow the rancher back to the site. They spend the better part of the next day filling up 2 entire vehicles of the wreckage. And Marcel, realizing how important this discovery was, what this all, portended at that time, because nothing had been reported missing. Nothing was being tested at that time. We checked whether there were rocket launches or any plane, as far as that may have gone down, any private aircraft reported missing. Nothing was amiss. nothing awry. Nothing awry. They weren't on standby in the event somebody should report anything. And so it quickly demonstrated that if we weren't missing anything, we weren't looking for anything, then whose was it? Because if it wasn't ours, then whose was it? And Marcel, quickly realized that. And so instead of just returning back to the base, the Marcel residence was about 7.5 miles north of the base entrance at that time. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, he wakes up Jesse Jr., their only son, their only child, and his mother, Jess Sr.'s wife, Vi, takes them into the kitchen. And there he has all this wreckage scattered on the kitchen floor and on the kitchen table. And Jess Jr., for having handled the actual wreckage and those I-beam struts, those I-beam sections with the hieroglyphic-like symbols that ran the length of each piece. And the way Jess Jr. kept emphasizing the fact that through the entire time that his father tried to piece together some of the wreckage, not once did he mention that this could possibly be a plane, a rocket, anything conventional. And he certainly didn't suggest it was any type of weather balloon of off-the-shelf material of rubber and foil and sticks and string and tape, that type of thing. But according to Jess Jr., all his father kept talking about was flying saucer, crash of a flying saucer, wreckage from a flying saucer. Now, I can't emphasize enough, Thiago, that Jess Marcel was the #1 intelligence officer in the entire U.S. military at that time. And for one simple reason, they were in charge of the atomic bomb, the 509th Bomb Wing. The first atomic bomb squadron in the world was a composite unit where they selected the best officers, the best pilots, crew, doctors, nurses. If you swept the broom back on that base back in 1947, it was because you were the best sweeper in the entire U.S. military, and you all had a top security clearance for the atomic bomb. So for anyone who still would like to in any way denigrate the credibility of Jesse Marcel Sr., and then his son, who goes on to become a surgeon, a ear, nose, and throat doctor, as well as a full colonel in the Air National Guard. You better have your documents in hand. You better have good standing, because we could not have better witnesses in attesting that this indeed was a genuine flying saucer.
Yeah, Jess Marcel was not a simple person. He wasn't anyone. He was the man of the intelligence in that base, the most important base in the United States back at the time.
In the world at that time. In the world at that time.
Yeah, in the world at that time. John, how many witnesses have you interviewed, and are there anyone alive? First-hand witness, there anyone alive?
Good question. To date, we have interviewed over 600 witnesses, either directly or indirectly involved with what happened back in July of 1947. And that including all of the civilians, the ranchers, their spouses, their children, their grandchildren, the hired hands, their families, the press who were all involved throughout the entire state. Anyone who tried to report on this back in 1947, whether with Associated Press or United Press International or Reuters or the main network affiliates, ABC, NBC, if you had any connection to the event at all, we tracked you down and we talked to you. And then you had the military, you had the Roswell Army Airfield, and we had the good fortune of recovering their base yearbook from 1947. So we had over 3,000 names to start with. And then when we learned that other units were brought in from White Sands, from Fitzsimmons, from Carswell in Fort Worth, from Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, even all the way to Washington. And then we tracked all these people down. So you can see how the numbers just continued to grow year after year after year. And the saddest thing is, THIAGO, that for so many of them who still lived the balance of their lives out in Roswell, it's amazing how many of them may have served in Roswell at the base just for a year or two, but how many of them retired back there, went back and retired in Roswell. And so we, in the earlier stages of the investigation, we literally could go to Roswell and from referrals of, well, you know who you should talk to, or you know who still might be alive, or you know who might know something. We literally were tracking down dozens of witnesses just within the Roswell area. And year after year, as more of these people would pass away, I would comment that every time I go back to Roswell, it gets a little more lonely, to the point that when I go back to Roswell, I was back in Roswell 6 times this year. And I can honestly say they're all gone. Everyone's gone. If I were to be very specific, very direct, there probably are 2 firsthand left. And they were children at the time. So that's where we were correct in always describing that we were racing with the Undertaker, that it was a race we knew we would not win, that time was not on our side. And I can't emphasize enough, though, THIAGO, that our greatest frustration so often was when, now this is before the internet, before you could just type in a name, or you could pop in a CD-ROM of a phone directory with a name, and up would pop a phone number, up would pop an address. Well, we had to actually track these people down when we started back in 89, 90, 91, 93, that type of thing. We were doing air certification checks. We were thinking that many of these men still kept their pilot's licenses registered beyond their military careers. We were doing credit checks. We were doing motor vehicle. We worked with a hacker with the VA, the Veterans Administration. We did everything we could to track these people down, and we were quite successful at a time that you had to actually put in the time and effort. It was beyond just entering a name on your smartphone, that type of thing. And nonetheless, we would, too often, we would find somebody and we would talk to the spouse, and he would go, "Oh, that's so unfortunate. He just passed away a year ago." A year ago. We had a few others that we missed by months, mere months. And the worst one was when, and he would have been a significant witness, we finally located him. And we call up, and the wife answers the phone, and she is just returning from the funeral. It's gone forever. The finality of death. I mean, you talk about being the greatest silencer of eyewitness testimony. The idea that whatever information so many of those witnesses possessed, it's gone forever. They took it with them. And so I so often look back and I go, if we only would have started a year earlier, if we only would have started 5 years earlier, who we would have, been able to talk to, who we still would have been able to get to go on the record. And Yes, 600 witnesses, but so many we missed. So many we missed.
Well, my friend, I prefer to think that you got 100 witnesses, 100. So their stories, their testimonies will never be forgotten because you did your work, your work. They are in your books. They are known. They were there was the in something that is amazing in an event never saw in a human history.
Mm-hmm.
There are testimonies of something like that, and but
And the consistency. That's what amazed us from the very beginning. They were all telling the same story, whether it was civilian, the media, all the military. It was as though they were all reading from the same script. And that's impossible. I mean, as any accident investigator, any insurance investigator would tell you, 10 people witness an accident and you have 10 different versions. And they were, with Roswell, they were all describing an extraordinary incident. And it affected them all in a profound way in that because it was something unearthly, something beyond their comprehension, that words escaped them. They couldn't speculate. They couldn't sensationalize. They didn't need to. All they had to do is describe what they saw, what they witnessed, what they held in their hands. And as a result, it's come together wonderfully to the point that it's, as you yourself have called it, it's the biggest story of the millennium. And from a total skeptic, I'm to the point when I'm asked, Don, do you believe? I respond, no. But I'm 99% convinced. Big difference. Belief is an opinion, a dogma of faith. When you're convinced of something, no one's going to take that away from you.
yeah, that's true. Well, another thing that's true, but I want to hear from you for our audience. Is that true that military even threatened to kill witnesses in the case?
Sadly, yes. And it was at a time post World War II that the military were all heroes as far as the ending of World War II, the defeat of Nazi Germany, the defeat of Imperial Japan, that all the ticker tape parades, the military walked on water. And to have that dashed against the rocks, just totally destroyed. Much of the talk was that prior to the Roswell incident, there was a wonderful rapport between the base personnel and the civilians, the locals in town, in Roswell. They were friends. It was like one big family coexisting. And then after this all went down, the level of distrust, the bitterness, nobody talking, nobody friendly, everybody pointing fingers and whispering between themselves. And the worst of it was the eyewitness testimony of people who were then visited by the military, by the sheriff, by his deputies, who were essentially read the Riot Act. They were told that if you ever say a word about this again, we will kill your children. We have dozens of testimonies of children who were told, you will never see your parents again. And then, in fact, we just talked about that earlier today. Colonel Hunter Penn, he was called a hitman for the Army at that time. And he was a C-54 pilot in World War II. And he was part of the squadron called the Hells Angels because they had no qualms about collateral damage. If civilians were in the way, if children happened to be in the church that they were bombing, he didn't bat an eye. And so his family described to us that whenever he would drink to excess, he would start bragging about how he was assigned months after the incident to go out to Roswell from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and essentially reinforce all the threats to specifically the ranchers north of town who had seen the wreckage, the crash, the bodies, that type of thing. And he used the term that he would heart attack those dumb farmers. In other words, he would put the fear of God into them. And then we learned that he liked to brandish an ice pick that he would, pound into his hand as he was, emphasizing what would happen if they would ever, speak out of turn, say the wrong thing in public. And, one has to keep stepping back and ask themselves, would all this have gone on days, weeks, months after the incident over a damn weather balloon, which the government still maintains after all these years, albeit, under a top secret project called Mogul, but it's the same damn weather balloon. Same rubber and foil and sticks like I described earlier, off-the-shelf material that a 5-year-old child would have recognized. And you're going to threaten to kill children over that? No. I issue a challenge to every skeptic, every debunker that is out there. You show me another example where in something as mundane as a weather balloon that the government, that the military ever resorted to such extreme measures as killing children over something as nonsensical as such a contemporary prosaic, device as a weather balloon. Sorry, you're not going to find it. Only Roswell. For only those who want to hold on to that explanation. But they have 0 witnesses. They are batting 0. We're not. We have over 600.
My friend, are there institutions and companies, enterprises in the United States that are trying to reproduce the weather balloon today?
Yeah, why would? And the funny thing, THIAGO, is that, as you know, the timeline, the story, that after Roswell Army Airfield on Tuesday, July 8th, puts out that press release at noon Mountain Standard Time here in the States, that they had actually captured a flying saucer. In other words, the first atomic bomb squadron in the world announces, we got one. We actually took into possession a crashed flying disc. And General Roger Ramey, Colonel Blanchard's boss, the base commander, Ramey, being head of the 8th Air Force, says, I want to have a press conference. But we're not going to have it in Roswell. We're going to have it at my office at Carswell Army Airfield in Fort Worth, Texas. And I want that intelligence officer, that Marcel, I want him there too. And little does Marcel know, he's about to become the patsy, the fall guy, because Marcel would fly some of the actual wreckage on a B-29 called Dave's Dream. And they arrive in Fort Worth, and Marcel would take some of the actual wreckage to General Ramey's office, and he puts it out on his desk. And Ramey says, I want to see where this all went down, where this happened. They go to a map room, and they come back, and wouldn't you know it, the actual debris is now all missing. It's all gone. And in its place is a torn up weather balloon with a radar reflector kite all shredded up on the floor in front of the general's desk. And then the general raves in the press, and Marcel is ordered to pose with some of the reflective foil debris. And Marcel is ordered to keep his mouth shut, not to say a word to the reporters. He's kept overnight till the next evening. But the key point, as you were asking about the testing, Ramey, because the original destination of that flight that Marcel was on, which made the preliminary stop at Fort Worth for the press conference, was Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, where the wreckage was to be tested and analyzed. Now, Ramey announces to the reporters, well, it's just been officially identified. It's nothing more than a Rowan target device, a weather balloon with a radar reflector kite. End of story. No need for any further analysis. I'm canceling the flight on the right field. Well, not only did the Pentagon disagree with that, not only did the major media disagree with that, but also the FBI. In fact, we have the document, the telex of the official FBI telex from 6/17 that very evening that reports what Ramey has just announced, but then it makes the statement that based on their conversations with Wright Field, this information is not true. We've been talking about something else. We're not talking about a weather balloon. We're talking about it being the real thing. And it's still going to go on the Wright Field for testing and analysis. In fact, the Pentagon, when contacted, reiterated that the wreckage was at that time being tested at Wright Field. Now, Wright Field was headquarters of T2, which eventually would become Foreign Technology Division. They did, for example, all the testing of all the captured German weaponry, armory from World War II, a lot of the Japanese military equipment. Whenever a Russian MiG was recovered, it would go to FTD, Foreign Technology at Wright-Patt. And so here it made perfect sense. If you had something of a foreign design, truly foreign, it would go to Wright Field, Wright-Patterson. So since that time, THIAGO, in, again, part of these 600 witnesses, we have firsthand witnesses at Battelle Institute, just down the road from Wright-Patt in Columbus, Ohio, from Rand Corporation, from Los Alamos, from General Electric, from Hughes Aircraft, from Boeing, from Lockheed, all describing receiving Roswell wreckage for their testing and analysis and the potential of reverse engineering the material. So isn't it fascinating that within the last 6 months, former Senator Harry Reid of Nevada, in one of his interviews with the New York Times, stated that he had information that Lockheed had actual crash saucer wreckage. Well, we've had that for 20 years. So it keeps painting the scenario that the material, again, was so important that they took the chance of assimilating it into the private sector. And as easily demonstrated, here in the States, the military/government doesn't manufacture anything. Every tank, every ship, every plane, every rifle, every bullet is manufactured within the private sector and then provided to the military. And so that's why when I'm asked today, Don, where do you believe the wreckage is? Where do you believe it all is today? I can quite confidently state that it no longer is in the hands of the government or the military, that it's in the private sector, that they're still holding on to it. They're still trying to find the on button, so to speak. They still can't bridge the technology that it's that much a quantum leap in figuring out how this thing flew. And as a result, all those firsthand witnesses we have at those private corporations indeed must be telling us the truth, that they are presently in possession of the physical hardware, and as of yet, they still don't know what makes this thing fly.
Oh, it's amazing. I wonder if they use all these things to the humankind, to develop the humankind. But I know that the proposals that would be I know, military or just technology to one country, not for the humankind.
You're absolutely correct, THIAGO, because the military mindset is strictly the military application. How can we make it into a weapon? It's not how can we benefit society? How can we, create something that might cure cancer? That's not the prerogative of the military, especially here in the States. And as a result, I'm sure there too that the military saw, my God, if there's material that is so nearly indestructible, just imagine if we had a fleet. Just imagine if the Air Force here had a fleet of flying saucers. You're talking about total air supremacy. You rule the planet by having this technology. So, and then the rest would just fall into place, certainly. But so there too, that made perfect sense that they would be looking at how can we best weaponize this technology.
Yeah, sadly, very sadly. Well, we know a nurse that was friend of Glenn Danis, the mortician.
Right.
And we know, we know that she saw the bodies of the aliens. But in your book, Witness to Roswell, that will be updated
Yes.
version in 2022, then I'm gonna get it. I will get it.
75th anniversary. Our editor actually came up with the idea. He called and he asked, would you guys have enough new material? Because we had just done the year before Case Closed, where we essentially had our day in court. We presented our opening arguments, our evidentiary, our best witnesses, and then our closing arguments leading up to where we feel, as we've had judges, we've had attorneys tell us that we could take Roswell in any court of law and win hands down. So he was most surprised that when a year later he asked, and we said, yes, we do have more new material. We have still open ends that we can tie up. And for the 75th anniversary, we will have 2 new chapters, and we have sprinkled new witnesses throughout, all new photographs. We've rewritten some of the other material. So it's going to be an anniversary edition of Witness to Roswell, which was the #1 selling UFO book in the world for 2 straight years. So we're very happy that it will be part of that commemoration.
And I have the first edition. I have it, and I will have the second one.
Very good. We'll make
sure. Well, and in your book, Witness to Roswell, you talk about the nurse, right. Miriam Andrea Bush. She also saw the bodies of the aliens. She was working at the hospital, at the air base. Who is she? Who was she?
Yeah, Miriam Bush was, as I had mentioned earlier, not to confuse her with Glenn Dennis, the Ballard Funeral Home mortician, who we identified her as Adeline Fatton. She was the one that matched the mortician's description, and she was transferred to England, as Glenn had been informed, and she did not die in a plane crash, but rather did die a few years later of a childhood disease. So Glenn's nurse, who I remain convinced he was having an affair with at that time, was Adeline Fatton, who was part of the medical squadron at the Roswell Army Airfield. We can prove that, we can document that in 1947. Now, Miriam Bush, who you mentioned, she was the head secretary to the base administrator at that time, the hospital administrator. And he took her to an examination room. And at first she thought they were children on these gurneys under these drapings, these coverings, these sheets. And then she saw one of them move. And as she got closer, she was just shocked to see that it wasn't a child. It wasn't from here. It wasn't human. And she was haunted by this to the point that we missed her by 3 years because she would check into a motel outside of Los Angeles. And they would find her body the next day with a plastic bag wrapped around her head. And they claimed it was suicide. But yet, when we tracked down the family, her sister, her brother, and her sister-in-law, and then we talked to a detective who was involved in the investigation. He admitted that she had bruises and scratches all over her both arms, suggesting that there had been a struggle, and it wasn't with herself. So, as the family, I'm convinced she was murdered. She was silenced forever. And it may have been as the investigation was about to take off on our part, and we've been told that there were other strange deaths, other suicides, disappearances. That would be another show. We could easily do a show just on all the strange deaths that have taken place regarding Roswell. In fact, a high-ranking officer once told us that, Don, you need to look into all the suspicious deaths and accidents that took place within months and years after 1947. And then he smugly laughed and went, they weren't all accidents. They weren't all natural deaths.
Well, I'm not playing here the theory of the of something, but some say that the U.S. killed Kennedy, U.S. killed Marilyn Monroe, U.S. killed a lot of people. Well, let's leave it apart.
Let's just say that quickly, the CIA has long been in bed with organized crime here in the States, our mafia. And the mafia does their killing for them, so to speak. And as a result, there are many strange, unaccounted for disappearances and deaths, all the way up to the office of the presidency. That if you know too much, if you become a threat, you're just eliminated. There's nothing shocking here in the States. It really isn't.
Well, you will wake up in a desert, right?
Yeah, they'll be picking your bones out of the sand, as Glenn Dennis, the mortician, was told.
Yeah. Well, you recently participate of in a series for the History Channel, where a diary was discovered that would have been written by Jess Marcel.
Right.
It seems that this information has not been confirmed. Can you tell us more about this? His diary is not Jess Marcel diary. It was some diary else. What was that?
That's the strange thing about it. It's a log. It's a diary from the year 1947, and it was discovered with the effects, the remains, as personal things, of Jesse Marcel Sr. And his son had saved them, Jess Jr., and when he died, the family found this diary. And the question was, as an intelligence officer, would it have been in code? Would there be cryptic messages potentially related to something very secret, very important? And especially given it was the summer of 1947. So the History Channel did that series, Roswell, the First Witness. And unfortunately, we ran up against COVID, the lockdown. And we were hoping to get a second season where we could once again follow up on all these loose strings, all these open scenarios that we had initiated. And History Channel they've moved on, sadly. And so the one thing that they did determine, because I had provided handwriting samples of many of the officers who worked with Marcel at headquarters back at the base at that time. And they determined, the cryptologists determined that there were at least 3 different authors, 3 different handwritings, and that it constantly reverted, it went back and forth from script, sans serif, to block. And so that was somewhat suggestive of an emphasis on certain words, on certain subject matters. And so it was starting to become rather compelling as to is there indeed some message contained within all this. So at the moment, sadly, it's all on hold. And whether they even go to another cable network, I haven't talked to the producer, Larry Landsman, in some months, but I need to pressure him again that he shouldn't sit on this, that there are many things we still need to follow up on and get to the bottom. And the Marcel log, the Marcel diary, is certainly one of them.
Great. Let's see what we're gonna have. My friend, with so many UFO cases going on lately, why focus on one from 16 years ago? Well, you have done, if not mistaken, 4 expeditions to the UFO crash site in Roswell. Is there anything to be discovered about the Roswell case in the crash site and in the testimonies?
You make the very argument that I would make with anyone concerning why continue investigating something that's going on 75 years and why after all the witnesses have passed on. And unlike every other UFO event, which at the best may be a fuzzy photograph, maybe some video footage, maybe a landing where you have some swirled grass, maybe some metal slag, maybe some remnant, that type of thing. But it's a very fleeting event. With Roswell, something indeed did crash. It was recovered. There were hundreds of people involved. Hundreds of people handled the wreckage as well as the remains. And it is still presently being preserved someplace. And I would like to believe whether in continuing archaeological work, as we plan on going back next year, we definitely are, and for all of the military as well as civilians who may have slipped or scurried a piece away, that there may be a piece in an Army footlocker or behind a cement wall down in a crawl space or basement or in a hidden briefcase someplace. And that's where the hunt continues, because unlike all the other UFO cases that now you see it, now you don't, with Roswell, it's still very much here. It's someplace here. It's not out there. It's here where we can still hopefully retrieve, recover, present a piece of the physical evidence, and then it's case closed. Once and for all, we have been able to demonstrate before the world not only did Roswell happen, but that we are not alone. We're being visited by a technology off the planet. And I can get on to something much simpler like cancer research or just kicking back and, mission accomplished. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
And prove that militaries lied for so many years.
Well, and that too, demonstrating that there's so much at stake, that why would they have threatened? Why would they have silenced? Why would they have altered records, serial numbers? Why did they do all they could and resort to such extreme measures to cover up something that they explain away, which is something so mundane? And yet all of their activity demonstrates that it was something extraordinary.
Great. My friend, to finish, what are your plans for the present and for the future?
Well, you mentioned, THIAGO, the next book.
The next book, research, everything.
75th anniversary next year. We are, for the first time, creating a full-scale diorama of the crash site at the museum in Roswell, the ship, the bodies, the terrain, just as the eyewitnesses described it. We're going to take you back to 1947. We're doing a wall of witnesses at the museum. We're going to have 200 faces with their testimony on this huge wall with the caption, Wall of Witnesses. And each and every one of them, military, press, civilian, attesting to the fact that this indeed did happen. And it was something made off of the planet. We are still tracking down family. We're still speaking to sons and daughters. We're still getting deathbed testimonies where we missed a particular eyewitness, but yet to find the families, and they're saying that, yeah, just a day before Dad died, he told us all about Roswell. Secondhand, but nonetheless, when it corroborates the firsthand, it's most relevant. It's very important. So we work on this every day. We truly do, because to us, the fire remains. It's something not only, it's been the adventure of a lifetime, no doubt. And most would envy the fact that it's taken me all over the world, China, Japan, South America, Australia, Russia, throughout Europe, on and on and on. And all talking about Roswell. Because, again, I can't emphasize enough that if I'm wrong about all this, it doesn't change anything. Not a thing. But if I'm right, as all the witnesses to the deathbed said, they were right. It did happen. It changes everything. And I want to be at the finish line when that finally does all happen.
Oh, my friend. First, you got the finish line. You'll be my host at Roswell because I want to go there next year. So probably...
You know you're going to be invited.
Probably to the first sell for your book, and to go to the Roswell Museum and see all the new construction that will be there to the UFO that crashed there.
I promise you a personal tour.
Great. My friend, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for all information. You are the guy about Roswell. And
I'm flattered. I consider you a dear friend. I look forward to seeing you soon. Well, and then we have our joint meetings with ICER at times, and hopefully you'll join us as well. But I hope things are improving as far as in Brazil, that we're able to get back to a state of normalcy, that we can get on with our work, because
yes.
we still have a job to complete, and
yes.
we're teammates in all this, and so it's always a pleasure, THIAGO. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for your all information, and I'm sure that the Brazilian audience, you're gonna love it. So thank you very much, Don.
We'll do it again.
Yeah, we do it again and several times. Thank you, my friend. Thank you very much.
Take care. Stay well. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.